What makes a good story, and why does Genshin fall short? One point that pretty much everyone can agree on is that people have wildly different perspectives on Genshin's narrative. Many love it, and there's a thriving community of people who dive deep into the lore, explore its hidden web of references and tantalizing hints, and speculate about what happened in Teyvat's past and what we might see in its future. Many loathe it too, and with constant complaints about bloated dialogue, lack of depth to its conflict, lack of nuance to the characters, and so much more. I actually find myself agreeing with both perspectives. How does that work? I really care about stories. I couldn't live without films, books, TV. Fiction brings so much joy to my life. While I love games just as much, if not more, they're different to those other mediums. For one thing, a game doesn't have to have a story. Some of the best of all time are completely story-free, and even if a game does have one, it doesn't have to be its main focus. Some of my favorite gaming experiences were very light when it comes to their narrative. But when they do focus on their story, games can be even more compelling, and the ones which do always meant the most to me. My favorites let you step into a new world and explore for yourself. The feeling of discovery, which makes fiction so compelling, is so much more potent when you're the one choosing where to go, who to talk to, what decisions to make. But that freedom can be hard to balance with the needs of a linear narrative. Some games perfect that balance. Genshin sadly does not. The beginning of any story has to hook you in, to plant something in your mind which makes you want to keep going. The best hooks are questions. The need for an answer compels you to find out more, and before you know it, you've been transported into another world. This applies not only to the central narrative, but to side quests and backstory too. The start of Horizon Zero Dawn, for example, filled my mind with questions. Where did Aloy come from? Why did the matriarchs cast her out? What are the robots doing? And why? And who created them? How did the world end? And how did any people survive? From the first moment, I could not stop searching for answers, and every corner of the world was filled with tiny pieces of the puzzle, and even the side quests felt like I was working my way towards the answers. In Genshin's case, for me, this is hit and miss at best. It took me a long time to get into the Archon Quest storyline. The overarching Find Your Lost Sibling narrative is instantly sidelined. Mondstadt and then Liyue's stories didn't have much of a hook, and even Inazuma struggled to really capture my attention despite a more intriguing concept behind the scenes. The side stories have rarely left an impression on me, save for the rare character stories or world quests which really hit the spot. But honestly, that never bothered me. What hooked me into the game was everything else about it. The beautiful world, gorgeous music, compelling combat, and overwhelming idyllic sense of freedom. The hooks have been getting better with every passing region, but for me, Genshin is still worlds away from those top-tier games when it comes to kickstarting a new story. I feel like a major part of why they fail to grab my attention is the way the stories are presented. Hoyo's writing style often makes me wonder whether the writers are paid per word. Ideas that could be communicated in a single sentence take multiple paragraphs, and then 10 seconds later a different character repeats the same exact thing just to be sure you didn't miss it. I'm very curious whether this is a deliberate attempt to pad out gameplay time, an artifact of the translation process, or perhaps a concession to how people tend to consume content these days. It's reminiscent of the fascinating idea of slop content, which is becoming ever more prevalent. Many films created for services like Netflix are now designed around the assumption that when people put them on, their main focus is on their phone and the story is mere background noise. Since people aren't paying full attention to what they're watching, the storytelling has serious constraints. They can't express their world building through visuals and hints alone, and instead the characters have to say things out loud multiple times to be sure everyone keeps up, and everything becomes slow and bloated as a result. Worse, regardless of why the writing is like this in Genshin, the very fact that it is repetitive and overly wordy kinda forces people to treat it like slop content. Since people end up skimming and only half paying attention, they end up needing the repetition to keep track of what's going on. This becomes a downward spiral where the problem just gets worse and worse. I've absolutely fallen into this at times. It sometimes feels a little unfair to make the comparison, but this always makes me think back to playing games such as Joseon or Rime, which tell fascinating and moving stories with next to no dialogue at all. The technique those games rely upon is often termed environmental storytelling, and it's an area where, in my opinion, Genshin is at its most disappointing. Environmental storytelling involves using the setting to convey the story through location designs, objects, music, secondhand conversations, and so on. Imagine a city divided into two. One half is pristine, beautiful, and filled with mechanical marvels. Anyone fortunate enough to live there has a luxurious life of fashion, culture, and commerce. The other half is not so lucky. It's dirty, dark, and every corner is crammed with dank and murky homes cobbled together from scraps, as its desperate people shelter in the industrial wastelands left forgotten by their more fortunate neighbors. I find it fascinating that Hoyo did build this narrative into the environment of Fontaine and then completely ignored it in the story. This divide between the rich and the poor is forever present in the world design and music, but it does not affect the story in any shape or form. This was a fantastic hook left utterly abandoned, and Fontaine will forever feel odd to me because of it. Contrast this to another fictional setting which fits the same description: the twin cities of Piltover and Zorn in Arcane. Just like in Fontaine, the world oozes inequality, but in stark contrast, everything that happens in Arcane stems from this great divide. It has so many intricate, interwoven narratives with such depth and soul to them, and for every single one, you can trace the conflict back to the ultimate source, the inequality inherent in the world. You can see it in the backdrop of every scene, you can feel it in the attitudes and prejudices of the characters, and you can watch it explode into violence as the story unfolds. And Arcane is a TV show. An open-world exploration game has exponentially more potential to really drive its narrative home through environmental storytelling. There are positive signs that Hoyo are trying to start making the most of this. One Natlan story really leaned into this concept, but I'll save that more positive point for the end of the video. For the most part, this aspect of Genshin's storytelling potential is left ignored. Subtext is another powerful concept which seems to just get thrown out the window when it comes to Genshin's storytelling. It's a reasonable argument, for example, that a lot of the complaints about Paimon stem from the dialogue's aversion to subtext. Subtext is any implicit meaning hidden in the text which is not stated directly. It's a powerful tool for drawing an audience into the story, developing characters, building tension, and adding depth. Fiction, which avoids using subtext, can feel disappointingly shallow. One famous example is this 6-word short story, For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. Those few words, terse and to the point, evoke an entire world of heartbreak. In a similar vein, the voice lines in Horizon Zero Dawn's hidden data points are often incredibly poignant. You find messages left behind by people sheltering from the apocalypse, trying to reach out to their loved ones. Hearing intimate moments between normal people while knowing that every last one of them is doomed makes for a haunting experience and grounds the wider story in deeply personal stories. In the real world, people often speak around an issue, and the best art echoes this too. In The Lord of the Rings, when Eowyn confesses her love to Aragorn, she does not outright state her feelings. Instead, when he asks her, "Why have you come?" she replies, "Do you not know?" Her meaning comes across through tone, emotion, acting, rather than just the spoken words. This friction between what someone says and what they mean lends so much depth to the story. That simple phrasing shows us not only that Eowyn cares for Aragorn, but that she fears her feelings are unrequited. Yet she has the inner strength to face that fear and let herself be vulnerable. And that's from a mere 4 words. When writers thread subtext throughout all aspects of their story, everything in it becomes so much more alive. Subtext is anathema to slop content, and sadly, Genshin does lean in that direction. Despite that, some of my favorite moments are dripping with subtext. Nahida sacrificing everything she ever really wanted for the good of her people. Purina declining to tell the traveler her secret. These are the moments which stick in my memory, and subtext plays a key part. But these moments are few and far between. For the most part, I'd say Genshin just doesn't trust us to keep up, and neuters its storytelling as a result. Another detail which is easy to overlook is cinematography. While Genshin's cutscenes have always been a high point, the same principle should be applied to the rest of the story as well, and this is one area where Hoyo have made huge strides over the years. Cinematography is the art of using visual techniques to tell stories in film. Just like environmental storytelling and subtext, it's a subtle art which can evoke emotion and influence how we experience the narrative. The techniques were pioneered by the film industry: camera angles, composition, focus, lighting, movement, and so on, but they can all be put to just as great effect in narrative video games. In the early versions of Genshin, even the most important conversations had incredibly static cinematography. At best, the camera would switch to show whoever was speaking at any given moment. In more recent years, Hoyo have really embraced using dynamic camera angles to make the story feel more alive and express some more emotion even in the more dialogue-heavy scenes. This approach can make the more mundane sections feel much more engaging, though it would be even better if the improved cinematography were to be combined with less clunky dialogue. However, even on this point, Genshin falls far behind some of those games which really nail the storytelling. For example, the opening sequence of Red Dead Redemption 2 is incredibly cinematic. cinematic. It truly feels like you're watching a classic Western film, and the cinematography couples with a fantastic dialogue and environmental storytelling to expertly set the scene, even in the sections where you're directly controlling the character. And then they deliver on that experience throughout the rest of the game with a mix of narrative sequences which feel like the best of cinema and player-directed gameplay which viscerally immerses you into Arthur Morgan's shoes. For me at least, Genshin's story has only come close to that on rare occasions towards the climax of the Archon quest in later regions. The more they bridge that gap between their incredible cutscenes and the rest of the game, the more effective their stories will be. When I was first getting into Genshin, all of this combined to make me feel like the story was pretty shallow and cliched, and as a result, I was very happy to lean into the other aspect of the game. However, as the lore community proves, there is far more there than I thought at first. It took maybe a year or so of playing before I really started noticing this. I think it was due to the Hu Tao incident. Long story short, I wanted Thoma but got Hu Tao instead. I remember talking about disliking her due to her mistreatment of Gigi, and when someone mentioned that there was more to the story, I ventured into the character profile story tab to actually read it through for the first time. There was far more nuance than I had expected. Even though the stories are fairly short, they pack a lot into them. Plus, of course, there's more spread across the rest of the text hidden throughout the game. For many of Genshin's characters, the depth written into their backstories never makes it past these obscure pages. Some select few are given enough screen time to have some growth during an Archon quest, but most are left static, and unfortunately, the same can be said for many of the characters' own story quests as well. This may be a conflict inherent in how narrative gacha games work. The gacha side is at its most effective when each character is iconic, unchanging. A simple shorthand like "this character is a talented dancer" or "this one is a workaholic who cares too much" is likely useful when it comes to marketing. Unfortunately, an unchanging character rarely makes for a good story, so many of them end up feeling flat. And this gets worse over time as more characters are added. There's even less time to devote to each character, so their appearances become shorter and shorter, and eventually they become a caricature of themselves. As much as I love him, Ito is a quintessential example of this. And that unexpected depth of lore applies to everything. Artifacts, weapons, wing gliders, outfits, recipes, all of them have pages of lore which all ties back together. Entire series of in-game books tell stories which are often subtle allegory or hints at truths long forgotten by the people in the world. Yay, some subtext! Genshin is crammed to the brim with deep and intricate lore which can be incredibly rewarding to those who dive a little deeper. The disconnect is that the breadth and depth of the lore struggles to make its way into the narrative. Whenever I've watched Genshin lore videos, it's like they're speaking a different language. Barely anything they're talking about seems related to anything I've seen in the game at all. And then when the lore does get the spotlight, it falls foul of the other issues like bloated dialogue, which makes it ineffective, and it's not as well integrated into the overarching story. To give an example where this is done right, Dune has some fascinating lore which affects the world in profound and subtle ways and shows up more directly in the story. Take the Mentats, for example. Humans who have been trained to function almost like computers, able to perform logical operations and calculate probabilities. In a surface-level reading of the story, they're intriguing, important to the narrative, and a unique aspect of the world. And that intrigue is the key for me. I generally don't care about lore just for its own sake, but when a story provides an interesting hook which hints at hidden depths, I need to know more. The lore behind the Mentats lives up to its promise. Millennia ago, a war broke out between humans and AI. Humans won the war, eliminating the AI, and ever since it became a taboo. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. The consequences of this ripple outward, affecting everything about Arrakis and the rest of the Empire, and it's fascinating to think about. For my tastes, in Genshin, there's an odd disconnect between how deep and interesting the lore is and how much of it the story actually encourages me to care about. Until that changes, it will likely fail to hook me in, which is honestly pretty sad. Another place where Genshin often falls short for me is in how well it explores its themes. Themes are the underlying messages or central ideas that stories explore, and are the source of the depth and meaning which can make them really matter. Some stories outright state the idea they're exploring, for example the famous "with great power comes great responsibility", which underpins so many fantastic Spider-Man stories, but it's often even better left unsaid. Genshin regularly introduces intriguing themes, but often fails to explore them in meaningful ways and outright avoids morally complex questions. For example, Liyue is the land of contracts and responsibility, and many of the stories in that region are intended to explore themes of duty, tradition, and the tension inherent when mortals and immortals coexist. The Liyue Archon quest felt pretty flat to me. While these themes are touched upon, they lack emotional resonance because they're disconnected from the personal stories of the characters involved. Zhongli's actions in setting up the situation are not critically examined, and as a whole, the quest focuses on sweeping societal change without really touching on how it will affect the individuals who live there. So much of it felt oddly inconsequential. Contrast this to Baizu's story quest, which focuses on the personal consequences and moral compromises inherent in the contract which defines his life. Everything about his situation is deeply tied to these ideas, how it twists his life and that of those around him, and what he intends to do to solve his problems. The story's scope is much smaller than the Archon quest, but despite that, it felt so much more meaningful to me. Or, for example, two ever-present themes in Horizon Zero Dawn are misuse of power and identity and belonging. These themes are core to the world building and Aloy's personal situation respectively, but they're also thoroughly explored through other characters, situations, and conflict that Aloy encounters throughout the story. Seeing these ideas through different lenses adds a ton of depth and resonance to the game. Some of Genshin's stories do a fantastic job of this, and they're always the ones which stand out the most to me. The ones which don't tend to fade into the background noise. Another thing which is handled very inconsistently in Genshin storytelling is exploration of consequences. One of the most important ways to make a story feel impactful is to show that it mattered. Without consequences, actions and choices feel hollow, and the world and the characters within feel artificial. Genshin is a mixed bag on this count. Some of the stories do have lasting consequences for the characters, and just like with exploration of themes, the ones which do this best tend to make their way towards the top of the list. But even those which do this better are often flawed. Warning, spoilers up to the 5.1 Natlan Archon quest incoming. Take the ending of Fontaine Archon quests, for example. By the time it's over, the country no longer has an Archon, Neuvillette ancient power is restored, and the entire nation is finally free from life under the shadow of a prophecy predicting its doom. But while that story had some profound consequences for many characters, it was bizarre to see it have so little impact on the world itself. During the finale, the entirety of Fontaine is devastated by a gigantic flood. But the moment the waters drain away, the world returns to the exact same state it was in beforehand. No buildings were damaged, no trees were knocked over, no animals were harmed. After the epic conclusion to the story, to instantly go back to an unchanged world is so jarring. That same thing happened after the Natlan War sequence, in stark contrast to the rest of the quest. Some of our decisions have clear consequences, which was a very nice touch, though it ended up feeling more like a callback to the things you did do, and it avoided showing the consequences of the choices you didn't make. The quest had some harrowing moments and incredible cutscenes, but once again, the moment after it was over felt a little off, and the world instantly went back to its usual state. The follow-up interlude quest seemed at first glance like it was going to explore the consequences of war on people's mental health, but instead it treated such a deep subject in an incredibly shallow way. Imagine if, instead, after these earth-shattering events, the world itself was left in disarray. You could have small quest lines to help people, or little tasks in the open world which restore locations to their former state. The war in Natlan could have left patches of abyssal corruption across the landscape which we can help clear up, just like the withering zones in Sumeru, but better integrated into the story. Even better if these kinds of things are built into the world in a more subtle way. I always loved the detail like this in Red Dead Redemption 2. For example, early on, there's a family building a house near the outskirts of Valentine. If you help them, you can come back later to see that their house is finished. If you kill them, it's left abandoned. Lasting consequences for player actions make the world feel so much more alive and make it feel like your actions matter, even when they're inconsequential. And of course, there's also Baldur's Gate 3, which takes this idea to the extreme. Sadly, the places where this does happen in Genshin tend to be either a negative experience or one which is underwhelming. Every time you interact with one of the Aranara in Sumeru, it goes away to the Aranara kingdom, leaving just a little less magic in the rest of the forest every time. I wish that instead we'd have just helped them in some other way, and they had stayed in their little home scattered throughout the world forever. Or think back to the islands of Inazuma, where we go through so much effort to clear out the curses that ravage the landscape, and yet we never see the normal people move back in, rebuild, and recover their lost lives. Obviously, those kinds of things are difficult to implement, but they would absolutely be worth it. The story and world would feel more vibrant, and the events would feel like they really mattered in a much more visceral way. Instead, these opportunities to make it more dynamic just get ignored, and Genshin's world feels static as a result. Of course, there is a chance that that feeling is intentional. Maybe the world is supposed to feel off because it's artificial or an illusion. I guess we'll find out soon enough in 2 years. Before we get to why I'm hopeful despite all my misgivings, there are a couple of adjacent issues which also bother me. Genshin has a recurring problem with time-limited story content and has also had one instance of external content messing with a story. Genshin has a regular cadence of time-limited events and currently has no way for us to replay them once they've passed. That's all well and good when it comes to gameplay, though it's always been a little sad to not be able to go back and play some of the brilliant minigames they've had in the past. What really gets on everyone's nerves is Hoyo's tendency to put important lore or character growth into the stories for these events. As someone who started in version 2, I only know that the sky is a lie because other players mentioned it. I've also always found it sad that people who start later on will never experience things like the islands in the second Golden Apple Archipelago event, which were just crammed with fascinating backstories for several beloved characters. Hopefully, someday they'll add the ability to replay past events as a separate optional download so mobile players don't have to worry, since there's a ton of legitimately good stuff there which we can only look back on via archived footage for now. As to the external story content problem, this was a one-time thing which I've been surprised to not see discussed anywhere. Before Arlecchino was released, Hoyo dropped a fantastic animated short exploring some of her backstory. The characters who appeared in the animated short ended up being central to Arlecchino's story quest. The problem? If you hadn't seen the short before playing the story quest, at many points it would be near incomprehensible because you were left without key context which would have let you follow what was happening. I played it on stream and some of the people there were hopelessly confused until we paused and rewatched the short for them. And if you had seen the short, so much of it was underwhelming. Some significant parts of the story were treated as a mystery plot, but the answers had already been revealed in the short. It's possible that this was an attempt at dramatic irony, but I don't remember a single moment where it really made good use of the fact that the players know more than the characters, so it fails there too. I'd love to see more ambitious animated content released alongside new characters, especially if it bridges the gap between the game and the anime, which we'll hopefully get some more news about sometime this decade, but they really need to integrate the two better than they did for this experiment. Despite all the issues, overall I'm pretty hopeful. Genshin storytelling has improved a ton over time and continues to get better and better, and of course there's so much fantastic material there for them to dive into. It's still a little inconsistent, but that's inevitable when you have a large group of writers collaborating on a huge project with such complexity and tight time constraints. And to give an example, let's talk about one recent case where Genshin took its environmental storytelling to the next level. If you wander around the east of Natlan, you'll stumble across an appalling scene. Saurians trapped in cages, imprisoned by the Fatui. After you defeat the Fatui, they remain trapped. They even beg for help if you talk to them while indwelling a Saurian. The path nearby leads down into a ravine, and as you venture forth, you stumble across more Saurians, some fallen and some trapped in cages, and more Fatui. Eventually, you find a nefarious facility buried deep in a cave system, with even more Saurians held hostage inside and huge machines doing who knows what. In the course of freeing the captives, you explore the cave system, solve puzzles, and fight enemies, eventually shutting down the facility and driving the Fatui away. And all of that happens without a word of dialogue. That whole experience was so much more engaging for me than the vast majority of quests in Genshin, and it made fantastic use of many of the story techniques I've been pointing out in this video. The simple hook of why are these poor dinosaurs imprisoned, how can I save them, was utterly compelling for me. The story was told almost entirely through the environment and the actions that the player is pushed to take. Natlan has been filled with smaller moments which follow this approach, and each of them has been a joy to see. But with the Phlogiston Research Center, Hoyo took it further than they have before, and I'm so happy to see it. Let's hope they add more of the same. Genshin's lore and backstory has fantastic depth which many people love, but much of their storytelling is sadly flawed, and the strength of the story is lost in translation. This has to be one of the hardest parts of making a narrative-based game, but other studios have managed it, and the results are amongst the most iconic and beloved games ever made. For me, so much of Genshin belongs in the top tier of all of my gaming experiences, and I just wish they'd make that step with the story as well. The biggest thing holding Hoyo back is that they need to trust the audience, and I guess it's kind of understandable if that's a little daunting. Until next time!